So I've got a whole load of questions, some of which were submitted in advance, and I'm going to bring a few of those in at the start, and a couple that came in on the chat, and I'll read those out. And meantime, can you think of questions? And if you put your hands up, I'm going to try and monitor who is asking questions. You can put your hand up by going to the More button and go to like, oh dear, where is it? Reactions. If you go to reactions, there's like a raise hand button. So if you go to that, I should be able to see it. And I'm just going to start. I need to put participants up so I can see everybody. There we go. Right. So I'm going to start with a question that came in on the chat. So we got a question in advance that yes, will NPF4 really persuade local authorities to take the protection of biodiversity hotspots seriously, even if they might be currently listed as brownfield? Who wants to answer that?
Shall I go first, Claire? So if you read the policies, you would think that it probably would get local authorities taking protection of biodiversity hotspots seriously, and not only biodiversity policy 3, but policy 9A specifically mentions the biodiversity value of brownfield land which has naturalized, and says it should be taken into account. So so if the hotspot's being recorded, it should be considered, and the policy is there. But as we can see from the Cool Links decision today, it's one thing to get a planning officer to read the policy and take a view on that. What councillors decide is another question. That's the discretionary system that we've got. Claire might want to add to that. I don't know.
I think the only other thing I would add is that one of the things that's in the pipeline is training for local councillors as well, and that's something else that we've been commenting on. And I clearly from Cool Links, I think the way it was discussed, apparently I wasn't there, but I've heard that there are some gaps in knowledge and appreciation of these policies and how they are being expected to be interpreted by local councillors. So I think that's really important.
Thank you. So there's one from St Fittick's Park, giving the example of St Fittick's Park. How can the conflict between sustainable economic development, which you mentioned, Nikki, and enhancing biodiversity and community well-being resolve when there are pressures for both in the same place? So I think that's specifically about what's happening at St Fittick's. I know you're quite familiar with that. Claire, do you want to answer that one?
Well, I know that there's people here that are far more familiar with it, aren't there? I think, but I think it's difficult because I think it's if you're you've got a local development that's happening, but you've got a local park or something to protect, and there's a national development in the offing, then that's a sort of bit of a David and Goliath fight, really. So I think the campaign for St Fittick's Park is one of the best I know, and legal challenges. I think that's the way to fight these things. It's expensive, but we've now got the Environmental Rights Centre Scotland that have been helping various groups take legal challenges and to fight things on a legal basis. That wasn't here prior to NPF4 either. So it's a new, check out the Environmental Rights Centre Scotland, ERCS.Scot. I think we could be able to put a link to that in the chat. But I think that's really important that we start looking at court challenges and challenging these things more vociferously in the courts.
Thank you, Claire. So something that came in on the chat, RSPB and Nature Scotland frequently object to wind farms, but their concerns are ignored due to government targets. Do you think NPF4 policy 3 is going to make any difference to this? I know that I think it was Nikki was touching on wind farms and stuff. Do you want to answer that, Nikki?
It might, in some circumstances, make a difference. I mean, it is there. It has to be taken into consideration, but the support for renewables is pretty strong in NPF4. So yeah, it's gonna depend on the balance of judgment and the particular area. Yeah, hard to say for sure.
We also had a question.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Kat, I'll just say that we mustn't underestimate the lobbying power of the renewables industry as well. When we were saying things about, it's not all about NPF4, it's the broader drivers and things. I think we have to look at that and how the pressure that is being placed from volume house builders and renewables industry to push their agenda, and yeah, it's a little bit of fight back against that, really.
Yeah,
We've got a question actually. Sorry,
I was just going to add that it seems really unfortunate that there isn't a slightly more strategic approach to renewables, that it's almost like a first come first served application approach. It doesn't even matter whether there's a grid connection, you can still have an application for wind farms or other renewables going in. So it doesn't seem ideal, but not all of that is down to NPF4 or planning or Scotland. It goes beyond that too.
a question came in on the chat that's kind of related to both of those. It was Claire who mentioned the importance of like reducing demand and not just going with constant growth of everything. And there's a question from William Maxwell, who's talking about housing, retrofitting renewable technology to existing housing, and what moves can be sought to encourage retrofitting of technology to present housing stock. However, I think an addition could be put to that. Well, what can we do to make sure that housing stock is currently being built to net zero standards? Because we've seen a lot of lobbying on heat pumps from the mass house builders recently in the Scottish Parliament. So I don't know who feels that they could answer that.
Claire's not putting her mute off. Yes, I mean, this isn't all about planning. There is support for retrofitting in NPF4, so it's there in planning policy, and hopefully that will begin to have influence. There's also the policy about lifetime and life cycle emissions for developments, so that should perhaps kick in too, but it won't happen overnight. A lot of this is down to building regs, and obviously there will be lobbying for better environmental building regs, but there is probably lobbying going on the other side as well. Does that help, Kat? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's perfect. If anyone does want to ask a question, do raise your hands. Otherwise, I'll just keep going through the ones that were submitted in advance. We've got one here. How is biodiversity enhancement going to be written into new local development plan policies and then implemented via development management? Nikki, feels up for starting?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's all new, and as we mentioned, there's lots of guidance being developed. Slightly ironically, given the Cool Links decision today, Highland Council is apparently about to publish some biodiversity guidance for consultation, so it will be interesting to see what that says. I think more generally that there'll be an emphasis on nature networks in every local authority area. I know that Edinburgh City Council has done quite a lot of work on that already, and I think that's kind of a pilot, if you like, for how that could begin to work and be built on. It's kind of finding out what you've got already, how you can better connect it, and then enhancing it. And as Claire mentioned earlier, the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy and Strategic Framework that are coming should put more oomph behind that as well.
There will also
Claire,
be the
I'm
new,
going to read out the... I was thinking you could answer this. I'll read out the next one.
Okay.
I was just going to, because it's about biodiversity as well, and I thought you could answer this one at the same time. It was how to use the new system to bolster increasing biodiversity and improve community. Oh, sorry, hold on, not that one. Read that one. No, you go ahead. You go ahead. Sorry, that was my fault for thinking I could get two questions in one. Go ahead, Claire.
That's fine. I was just going to also add, there is a new environment bill coming up next year as well, and I think, you know, it's including targets for biodiversity enhancements. So a lot of this, I think, is fairly new stuff still, but I think the targets might help. So yeah, watch this space on the new environment bill as well.
Thank you. So something about place plans, local place plans. What are the obligations on community councils in relation to the need for place plans, and how will this be supported by local government? Claire, I know that you have been doing quite a bit on this. Would you mind answering that?
Yeah, I would say there is no obligation on a community council to do a local place plan. I think you need to think very carefully about why you are doing your local place plan. We've done a blog on local place plans. I don't know if Barry's got the link to that, but we can send that to you. And in that includes a link to a talk that was done by Paz, actually, and it was very useful for getting people to think about why they would be doing a local place plan. So I think, you know, either you want to think very locally, super locally, and do your local place plans, or perhaps you would want to think a little bit broader and to engage in your local development plan process instead. Doing the both might be quite challenging for community councils, I think. There are no resources behind doing a local development plan. The only thing that a local authority is required to do is to tell you that they're, you know, that sort of set out an invitation for you to do a local place plan, but there's no allocated resources to these. You can fundraise for them, of course, but they, you know, it's not particularly well thought through policy in terms of how people are actually going to deliver it. And of course, they don't form part of the statutory development plan, so they will be a material consideration, but they won't necessarily be such a weighty document. They might be able to inform your local development plan or not. Again, the jury is out. A lot of this stuff, it's actually difficult to say how much they're going to be influenced because we just don't know at this stage.
Thank you, Claire. Rachel has a hand up. Do you want to introduce yourself and just tell us where you're from and then ask your question? Thanks, Rachel.
If you have a renewable development, which is obviously an application which is in theory going to get a lot of support because of meeting climate change targets, but that development also is a significant risk in terms of increasing flooding, which is under policy 2 and 22 actually. How does that work in terms of importance? Because obviously a lot of the climate change issues at the moment probably ought to be directed towards mitigation, because we know they're happening. And you know, Storm Babette caused immense suffering and damage. So whatever is going to go on in terms of renewable development is not going to have an immediate effect, whereas actually mitigation for climate change, such as protecting peat trees, that kind of thing, not building things that are going to increase flood risks, will have a more immediate effect. So how does that work in terms of planning policy?
Thank you, Rachel. Can we start with Nikki on this and then go to Claire?
Yes, that's as you say, that's covered by a lot of the policies in NPF4, and policy 2, which covers climate mitigation and adaptation, would probably come in as well. I mean, I think you're right that there needs to be a lot of focus on carbon sequestration if we can, in using nature-based technologies, but or not technologies, systems, but yeah, it's going to be up to the decision makers to balance out all these things, and there's no getting away from them being difficult decisions, but that's how it's all going to play out, and we'll probably get a clearer steer on particular sorts of decisions as we go through more cases going through NPF4. That's not very helpful, but maybe Claire can.
I was just thinking, you know, if SEPA is involved, and SEPA is one of the organisations, the statutory organisations, statutory consultees that you know, objects to the application on the grounds of flooding, then, you know, perhaps that's going to be added weight to that, but there's no guarantee. And of course, Nature Scott is not known for commenting on planning applications or in terms of biodiversity too often either, so largely due to resources. So yeah, it's not a perfect system, is it, Rachel? And it is that, I think that's one of the frustrating things for people, is that there is so much uncertainty in it, and you know, it is so much about balancing decisions and political decisions as well. You have to enter into the mix, so it is an absolute minefield, and there's not a lot we can do about that at the moment.
We've had a couple of questions in about supplementary guidance, both on the chat, but also in advance. And would it be possible to explain a little bit more about supplementary guidance and how it works and how it will work? The specific question that we had in the sent in beforehand was, why doesn't the National Planning Framework enable councils to adjust to local matters via supplementary guidance? But there were sort of variations on that in the chat as well. Okay, well, so it was the 2019, I think it was the 2019 Planning Act that got rid of supplementary guidance rather than NPF4 specifically. So it's still existing guidance still matters, it still will be taken into consideration, but going forwards into the future, I think the thinking is that the LDPs won't have to repeat the national planning policies that are in NPF4. They're taken as already existing as part of the development plan, so local development plans should be able to absorb what previously was supplementary guidance. So it's supposed to be about streamlining. Whether it will really mean that there's a bit of loss of detail remains to be seen, because it hasn't happened yet, but I mean, obviously there's a risk that that will happen, but that's the thinking, that everything slightly moves up. Okay, Claire, did you have anything to add about supplementary guidance?
No, I would have said pretty much the same thing, I think. Yeah, it's and I guess, you know, if you want that supplementary planning guidance in your local development plan, then, you know, get involved in responding to it, and providing that, putting that forward maybe at the early evidence gathering stages, to say this is a bit of, you know, supplementary guidance that we want included in the local development plan. I would suggest.
Great. Well, we're getting near the end.
I see Jean has got her hand up.
Oh, has Jean got a hand up? Sorry,
Yeah.
I missed that.
It wasn't
Jean,
a technical one.
Can you unmute? Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Yes. Jean Charsley, Glasgow, Hillhead Community Council, and I deal with most of the planning and licensing affairs that come to the council. It seems to me that NPF4 is applicable to all areas, regardless of the needs of particular areas. So it isn't suitable in its form for areas like mine, for example, urban areas. Statutory guidance was the only thing that protected us in several cases. And if it's the Glasgow City Council have said that they will try to incorporate it, but it was a huge detailed document. How do you cannot put in so much detail if it's going to be in the local plan. Is there any opportunity to persuade NPF4 that they need to do more to enable local circumstances to be taken into effect? So it's two questions, really. One is that NPF4 is a blockbuster applying to everybody, regardless of their circumstances. What can be done about that? And the second one is, how do you enable full adaptation to local circumstances to protect local areas of concern? So it's not just on that biodiversity. When you come to a city, there are other things that you need to look at.
Who's happy to answer that?
Yeah, I think Jean, that's it's a good point. You know how NPF4 is about national policies, looking at the national thing, and I think they're quite keen not to steal the thunder and to be seen to be sort of dictating to local authorities about what should happen locally. I've heard the Scottish Government say that, so I think it's it will be up to local authority to incorporate those. If you don't feel that they are, then again, I would suggest you get some. You're good with lawyers. You've taken Glasgow to court, so I think that might be the best thing to be doing. Is seeking some legal advice about how to get that detail in, but trying to press for it initially through the development plan process. I can't really think of anything more to suggest. Can you, Nikki?
I suppose you could just write to the Scottish Government Planning Department as well. They do seem to be at least attempting to listen to people at the moment, and if that is a worry coming from community councils, you could give it a go, see if you get a response. But yes, I'm not sure how well thought through that's been.
We're going to take one last question from Alice, who's got a hand up. Someone indicated they might be waving and wanting to speak. Was there someone? Barry, did you see someone with an actual hand up? We'll move to Alice, and then we'll need to finish after that, I think, because we're running out of time. Alice, unmute and let us know where you're from.
Alice Morton, Stepson District Community Council. And my question for Clare and Nikki, have you any observations, comments on this infrastructure first approach? Recently, North Lanarkshire Council produced supplementary guidance on education in terms of infrastructure, and as Clare well knows, the pace of house building across the northern corridor of North Lanarkshire has outstripped the provision or delivery of educational infrastructure. So really just a very brief answer. I know you're running out of time. Any comments on what this infrastructure first approach might deliver?
Who's happy to answer that?
Well, I'll have a go and Claire can chip in maybe. So infrastructure first, it should be a consideration, particularly as you're talking about, Alice, large volumes of housing going in somewhere. The whole infrastructure first and the local living policies in NPF4 should mean that you're not just getting large numbers of houses with no facilities, no infrastructure, no services. It is all about producing better communities, not just numbers of housing. How that is going to play out, we're waiting to see.
Claire, do you have
Yeah,
anything
Alice.
to add to that finally?
Well, I would just say, yeah, it is the intention that, you know, particularly with the housing policies, that they, you know, the allocations that, you know, are there so that they can do the infrastructure first approach. So the more exceptions to that and more exceptional releases of unallocated land, and that's going to go contrary to that, as you found, Alice, in the Northern Corridor. But yeah, it's another. We should have just have this watch this space sort of graphic. But we can talk more about it, Alice, about infrastructure first. I think we might have to do a little bit more reading up on it as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Thanks.
possibly going to come down to enforcement and conditions and things as well, and how much that's going to be followed up, and whether councils have the resources to do that going forward. There's a lot of talk about needing more resources for planners to do all these things.
I mean, it sounds really wonderful, doesn't it? And this is it. The dream has arrived. Infrastructure before houses or house building, and it's just not happening. It's not there. But thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you very much, Alice. And actually that last question kind of also emphasises the importance of Claire's thoughts around how we monitor this on the ground, and monitor the effectiveness of NPF4, not just as a planning authorities of how quickly they do things, but how are they actually delivering to all these things that they say they're going to do. So now it's my pleasure to say thank you so much to Claire and Nikki for doing such a good talk, and also to tell you about our next talks. We've got one on the 17th of January. That's called Green Belts and NPF4. So a lot of you are working within Greenbelt areas. We're going to have a couple of groups giving a bit of an idea of how they've organised, what's been effective in their organising for that, which is going to be really informative, alongside some more specific chat about the guidance around green belts and what we're expecting might come of the NPF4 and what challenges and opportunities there might be. And then on the 31st of January, we're doing something about local development plans. So we heard quite a bit from Alistair Edwards about local development plans, but this would be much more of a chance for us to sort of share experiences and talk about how we think we can make the best impacts on local development plans. If it isn't through local place planning, what is it? How can we it's very important, these things are happening now for the next decade, so how do we input those? We're going to be sending out an email to everybody with a link to the talk, with also all the different links that you saw there. We'll put another link in for the questionnaires. I mean, there's an awful lot to do here. I'm sorry, it's a big long list of things to do just before Christmas. And also the links to where you can donate if you haven't already, or join. But can I say thank you so much to all of you for coming along, for Barry for dealing with all the questions, for Nina for doing all the admin and getting everybody here, and for Sarah for doing the slides and keeping us kind of on track. So I'll say goodbye on behalf of everybody at Planning Democracy and APRS, and we'll see you in January. Have a very, very happy Christmas when it comes. I realise it's still a few weeks away, even though I had my Christmassy hat on, which I'll put back on again. So thank you very much all.